Section 24 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers by James McCosh. Book 3, The Comparative Powers, Classification of Relations, Part 1. Chapter 2, Classification of Relations. We see a tree in full blossom. 1. We discover that this tree is the same as we saw yesterday, though the blossoms are further advanced. 2. We contemplate separately the blossoms, but as blossoms of the tree. 3. We notice that the tree resembles others standing near it. 4. We observe the shape and size of the tree. 5. We calculate how long the blossoms continue. 6. We try to estimate the number of blossoms. 7. We find that they emit a pleasant odour. 8. We discover that some are blown away by the wind. We thus find that the mind of man can perceive 8 kinds of relation. 1. Identity. 2. Whole and parts. 3. Resemblance. 4. Space. 5. Time. 6. Quantity. 7. Active property. 8. Cause and effect. I am sure that the mind can discover all these kinds of relations. Section 1. Relation of identity and difference. This relation carries us back to the simple cognitive powers. We have seen that we know objects without and within us as having being. The same object may be presented to us at different times, and it may be with different concomitants, and when we declare it to be the same, the judgment is one of identity. We have an immediate and direct means of knowing one kind of identity, and that is our personal identity. First, in every act of consciousness, we know self as having being. Again, in every act of memory, we have a remembrance of past self, and also a consciousness of present self, and on comparing them, we at once pronounce the two to be the same. There may have been many and varied differences between the two states. In the past state remembered, we may have been hopeful, elastic, joyous. In the latter, sad, depressed, gloomy. Yet we discern an essential self that is the same. All this is self-evident, that is, evident on the bare contemplation of the objects. It is necessary, we cannot be made to decide otherwise, or allow for an instant that we are different persons from what we were a month or a year or 10 years ago. It is also universal, that is, entertained by all men. We are thus entitled to regard it as intuitive, for it can stand the tests of intuition. We have no such direct means of knowing the identity of other and external things. I saw a man with a white coat yesterday, and I see a man with a black coat today. I have no intuitive means of knowing that it is the same man. I know, indeed, that everything we know has being, the thing we remembered in the past, and the thing perceived at present. But I have no intuitive means of knowing that they are the same. We are here thrown upon experience, which experience always falls back, however, upon the principle that everything has being. But it is by a gathered induction and inference that we are able to decide that this person or this table we now see is the same as that we saw yesterday. Hence, while there is no room for difference of judgment as to our personal identity, there is room for difference of opinion as to the identity of other things, and there are often mistakes and disputes as to the identity of persons. We have in these last cases to depend on the common rules of experiential evidence, taking care not to decide one way or other when we have no sufficient proof. The relation of identity is always one and the same, but it may take 3 distinct forms: identity proper, contradiction, and excluded middle. These were mixed up together and at times confounded in the ancient philosophy, in the medieval ages, and indeed till the present century, when they have been distinguished and carefully separated, greatly to the benefit both of logic and metaphysics. Identity proper. The same is the same. A is A. This proposition is apt to appear very trivial and even silly till we put it in this form. The same is the same, observed it may be in different circumstances or with different associations. I am sure that I am the same person today when I am in good humour as yesterday when I was angry. I discover that this man in robust health, florid and active, is the man I saw a year ago, pale, sallow, and listless. This same faculty guides us in all those judgments, affirmative, which are called immediate inferences, or derivative judgments, as when it is given that all men have a conscience, we argue that the Indian has a conscience. It also regulates all cases, affirmative, in which from two premises we draw a conclusion, as when it is given that he who is responsible has free will, and that man is responsible, we infer that man has free will. In such cases, the mind discovers an identity in thought in propositions which differ from each other in form, in language, and in extent. The principle of contradiction. Here, when we have a cognition or an idea of a thing, we are prepared to deny that it has not those qualities which it is regarded by us as possessing. As knowing that this body has a square shape, we deny that it is round. As, knowing what mammals are, we deny that they are not warm-blooded. Our negations, like our affirmations, thus carry us back to our knowledge and our ideas. The principle of contradiction has been expressed variously. One is, A cannot be not A. The best form, I think, is the old one so much used by the medieval logicians. It is impossible for the same thing to be and not to be at the same time. This principle applies both to things and their qualities. If I know that stone to exist, I cannot allow that it does not exist, and I must contradict those who so assert. Again, if I know that I have free will, I must deny that I have not free will. If I know that this body is extended, I put a negative on all asseverations that it is not extended. This principle regulates all propositions which draw a negative proposition by immediate inference. Thus, it being allowed that no man is infallible, we infer that the Pope and the public press are not infallible. It also rules reasoning in which the conclusion is negative. On being allowed that one who has not reason is not responsible, and that this man is without reason, we argue that he is not responsible. Excluded middle. When two propositions are contradictory, both cannot be true. If this man has free will, it cannot be that he has not free will. When the two propositions are truly contradictory, one or the other must be true. If John Smith did commit the robbery, it cannot be that he did not commit it. But it is to be observed that propositions may seem to be contradictory when they are not so, in which case they may both be true or both false. Thus man may be free, while yet causation acts in his voluntary acts. I may be able in one sense to conceive of space and time as unbounded, that is, I decide intellectually that they are so, and in another sense I am obliged by my nature to conceive of them, that is, image them, as being bounded. It has been shown by philosophic logicians that these three laws regulate all discursive thought. But it is to be noticed that discursive thought always implies something admitted on which it proceeds. All our immediate inferences and reasonings thus carry us back to our primitive cognitions, beliefs, and admitted judgments. Section 2. Relation of whole and parts. When we consider the relation of the whole to the parts, this is comprehension. When we consider the relation of a part to the whole, this is abstraction. When we separate the whole into its parts, supposed to be its whole parts, this is analysis. When we put the parts together to make up the whole, this is synthesis. These are operations which every one is performing every day. In their higher forms they act an important part in science of every kind. In the ordinary affairs of life, we have ever to break down the concrete or complex whole into its parts, to contemplate and use separately what we have seen together, and to combine things in order to make up a connected whole. To combine, for example, the separate sides and rooms of a house to make up our idea of the house. We are ever required to consider the attributes of things as well as the things themselves. In a loose way, we are ever distributing things into compartments and putting together the compartments to make a complete conception. Required even in practical matters, these are essential processes in every kind of scientific investigation. In nature different agencies are so mixed together that if we would ascertain their mode of operation, we must separate them. Inductive science, says Bacon, begins with the necessary rejections and exclusions, or, as Whewell expresses it, with the decomposition of facts. Abstraction is necessary in order to our thinking of, or inquiring into, any attribute, quality, or law. Analysis must be constantly employed in every kind of investigation, physical or metaphysical. It is equally true that in all scientific inquiry we ever aim at reaching a synthesis of the things we have considered separately. Section 3. Relation of resemblance. In our observation of this relation, as of every other, we proceed on our knowledge or idea, previous or present, of objects. From the knowledge or idea we have of them, we perceive that there are points in which they are alike. This enables us to put them into a class, to which we may attach a name. That class must include all the objects possessing the common attributes fixed on. By the faculty which discovers whole and parts, we get, as we have seen, our abstract notions. By the faculty which discovers relations of resemblance, we get our general notions or concepts. These two kinds of notions are not to be confounded. By abstraction we have an idea of an attribute. In our general notions we put things together that have a common quality. From this it appears that abstraction, which fixes on the common attribute, is necessary to generalization. It has to be added that after general notions have been formed, we can compare them and form higher and more complex concepts. 1. It should be noticed that in all cases generalization proceeds on common properties supposed to be in the things. The concepts are no doubt formed by the mind, but they are formed from things known or apprehended. When the things are imaginary, of course the notions may also be imaginary, but when the things are real, the concept has also a reality, that is, a reality in the common properties possessed by all the objects embraced in the class. 2. The human intellect, by its native tendency, is ever led to seek out points of resemblance among the objects which fall under its notice. As the singular objects pressing themselves on our attention are innumerable, and would be a burden on the memory were it obliged to carry them all, so we are compelled to form them into classes, were it only to enable us to bear them about with us more readily. While they and their properties are so numerous, they all proceed from a few elements, each with a few qualities, and so we are everywhere presented with likenesses which the mind is not slow to observe. Some of these are superficial and accidental, having no importance in the arrangement of the objects in the world, but others have a deep significance as proceeding from some universally acting cause, or falling out according to a law in which there is a divine purpose. These furnish us with the means of arranging natural objects into what may be called natural classes, into species and genera, orders and kingdoms, which have a deep meaning, and open to our view the nature of the order that pervades the universe. 3. It is of importance to distinguish between the relation of identity and that of likeness. In the one there is a sameness in that which constitutes the being of a thing, in the other in one or more of its qualities. Section 4. Relations of space. We can discover these because we have a knowledge of objects, say our own bodily frames and bodies in contact with them as extended, that is, occupying space. We are now able to compare bodies in respect of the space which they occupy, and thus determine their form and size, linear, superficial, and solid. By this gift of locality, as it may be called, we are able to estimate the distance and the bulk of objects, and to determine what they are as we meet them, say man or woman, boy or girl, horse or cow, tree or rock, river or mountain, often at a great distance. In all such cases we seem to settle on a unit of some kind, of shape or distance, and to fix on a line of direction, say in a straight line from our eye or ear, and to bring all things into a relation to these. The skilful and practised eye, or rather mind acting through the eye, may attain a wonderful accuracy, apart from the use of any instrument, in determining these special relations. By a process of abstraction, we can separate the space from the bodies in space, and then discover the relations of pure space. This is what is done in geometry. We define the things we are to look at, line, surface, triangle, square, circle, and then proceed to compare the things defined. Some of the truths we discover by pure intuition, that is, by the bare contemplation of the figures. Thus, on considering two parallel lines, we declare that they will never meet. In other cases, we cannot discover the relation directly, and we resort to mediate reasoning. We have found that A equals B, and B equals C, and we conclude that A equals C. We do not require any enunciated general rule to enable us to do so. We so conclude at once on the bare contemplation of the objects. But then some good purposes are served by expressing in a general form the principle on which we have proceeded, which is, things which are equal to the same thing are equal to one another. This may now be announced as an axiom regulating our reasonings. A corollary is a truth derived at once from some truth we have demonstrated. Section 5. The relations of time. We can discover these because we have already, by memory, have an apprehension of events as happening in time. These relations are not so numerous as those of space, but are of equal importance. They may be summed up under 3 heads: contemporaneous, prior, and posterior. Here, as in regard to space, we have to take a unit of comparison, a second, a minute, an hour, a year, a century, and estimate all things by it. The digits give us our decimal units, and the seasons the yearly units. Great events, such as the Jewish Passover, the institution of the Olympic Games, the birth of Christ, the flight of Muhammad, give our starting points in historical chronology. The fossils with the minerals give us the epochs in geology. By such means we can go far back into the past, and by reasoning from the past, look far forward into the future. Section 6. Relations of quantity. These are the relations of less or more, of degree of proportion. We can discover these because we have had objects before us with bulk and events running through time, and also because we have discovered relations between these, such as relations of space and time, and it may be all other relations. Having discovered objects and relations, we can find that they have less or more of the qualities we have fixed on, and specify the proportion between the qualities. In the practical affairs of life, this capacity keeps things in their proper place, calls forth our acts at the suitable time, imparts a unity and a consistency to the conduct, and makes things march in harmony. This is specially the mathematical talent. In geometry, indeed, the relations of space are the main ones looked at. In arithmetic, we may have to use the units supplied by time. But ever since Descartes showed that the relations of space could be expressed quantitatively, mathematics, as a science, may be represented as the science of quantity and as dealing with the relations of quantity. It is of importance to show that the relation of equality is not the same as that of identity or as that of resemblance. In the judgments of identity, we declare the objects to be the same. In those of resemblance, we proclaim them to have like qualities. But in equality, we declare them to be the same in point of quantity. When we declare that A equals 6, or that A resembles B, we do not affirm the things to be identical or that they are like, but that they are equal. By applying these distinctions, we are able to correct a mistake which certain mathematicians are seeking to introduce into logic. They interpret the proposition, all men are mortal, as meaning all men equal some mortals. Now this is to misunderstand and pervert the proposition which, when properly interpreted, means that all men have the attribute of mortality, a proposition in comprehension, whole or parts, and the involved proposition in extension, that is resemblance. All men are included in the class of mortals. End of section 24.